My husband Daniel only ever asked one thing of me with real fear in his voice. We had weathered arguments, disappointments, financial storms, and all the ordinary troubles that come with 25 years of marriage. Through all of it, his voice never shook. But the day he said, "Never go back to the Lighthouse, Ruth. Promise me." Something in him trembled in a way I couldn't forget. He didn't explain the reason. He didn't offer details or soften the request with a story from his past. He simply looked at me like a man who had seen something he never wanted to see again. And because I loved him, I promised. That promise sat quietly in our marriage for decades, like an unopened letter neither of us dared to touch. My name is Ruth Carver. I am 67 years old. And this is the story of the only promise I ever broke, and why I had to. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe to Her Legacy Tales, a place proving our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Daniel died the kind of death people call sudden, as if the word could soften the impact. He collapsed in our kitchen on a Thursday morning while complaining about the weak coffee. He'd always teased me for making it too light. One moment, he was standing near the sink, the sleeves of his old flannel shirt rolled up. The next, he was on the floor, and the house felt too quiet too fast. People talk about the long goodbye when illness drags on for months or years. I didn't get the long goodbye. I got a paramedic shaking his head. I got a funeral that felt like it arrived before I had time to breathe. And I got a son, Marcus, who stood at the service stiffly as if he were checking off an obligation on a to-do list, rather than mourning his father. The house in Ohio felt different after the funeral. Even the floors sounded different under my feet. I walked from room to room, trying to adjust to the strange math of widowhood. One person still drinking from 2 coffee cups, one pillow cooling too quickly, one set of footsteps echoing through a space built for 2. For 2 weeks, I lived inside casseroles and sympathy cards. Friends visited with gentle smiles that made me feel both seen and exposed. I kept my grief quiet because that's what women our age are trained to do. We know how to look composed even when our hands shake beneath the table. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, the call came. "Mrs. Carver, this is Linda from First Harbor Bank. I'm calling regarding your husband's safety deposit box." I almost corrected her. Daniel never kept a safety deposit box. But she continued, "It's located at our Coastal Maine branch. You're listed as the sole beneficiary." Coastal Maine. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Daniel hadn't been to Maine since before we married. He was born there, raised there, and then left without ever looking back. Whenever I tried asking about his childhood, he changed the subject. And when I once mentioned the ocean, he'd winced like the word itself stung. I told the clerk I would come. 2 days later, at 67 years old and still learning how to breathe without Daniel beside me, I boarded a long-distance bus heading east. I packed lightly, just 1 suitcase with clothes, aspirin, a picture of us from our 10th anniversary, and the determination to follow whatever trail he had left. The bus ride took most of a day. I watched fields flatten into hills, then thicken into forests. The farther we got from Ohio, the more I felt something tightening inside me, a knot pulling me toward a place Daniel never wanted me to see. We arrived in the coastal town just after noon. Gull Harbor, Maine. Population small enough that 1 traffic light felt like an accomplishment. The ocean wind hit me immediately. It carried salt and something colder underneath, as if the air remembered the people who tried to outrun their past. The bank was a small brick building with a sign that had faded from too many storms. A polite young clerk led me down a hallway to a private room. When she placed the safety deposit box on the table, I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to expect. Inside were 3 items: a hand-drawn map, a brass key, and a folded note. The map showed a winding road ending at a cliff. A lighthouse was sketched at the edge, the lines familiar in a way I couldn't explain. He had drawn it carefully, like someone who knew every board and stone. The key was old, heavy in my hand, with tiny waves etched along the edge. I imagined Daniel holding it, maybe turning it over in moments when memories threatened to surface. And then the note. Ruth, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you. Go once, only once, then decide what should live on. D. Short, direct, and deeply unlike a man who used to leave me love notes under the sugar jar. I stepped outside the bank with the key in my palm. The wind pushed hair into my face, and for a moment, the entire world narrowed to a single question. Why would Daniel lead me to the one place he'd forbidden? The lighthouse was 5 miles out of town. There were taxis, but I walked. I needed the time, the movement, the steady rhythm of steps crunching on gravel. The road twisted through tall pines. Their needles whispered overhead in a way that reminded me of secrets murmured through walls. By the time I reached the final bend, the ocean was roaring loud enough to feel in my chest. The cliff rose before me, and the lighthouse stood at the edge, solid against the gray sky. I expected decay, rot, a building abandoned to the wind. But it wasn't abandoned. The lighthouse was freshly painted a soft white. The attached keeper's cottage had curtains in the windows. Someone had swept the porch recently. The doorknob shone as if it had been polished that morning. A wooden sign read, "Harbor House," the paint crisp and new. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, stunned. This place wasn't forgotten. Someone had maintained it with care. Someone who knew the details Daniel appreciated and the comforts he never admitted he enjoyed. Someone who cared enough to keep it alive when the rest of the town seemed worn around the edges. I wasn't alone on the cliff. A woman in her early 60s stood outside the neighboring house, leaning on the railing like she'd been waiting for me. Her silver hair moved with the wind, and her expression carried the gentle wariness of someone who had seen too much. "You're Ruth Carver," she said, her voice steady. "Yes," I replied. "How did you know?" "You married Daniel," she said. "And Daniel was easy to recognize in the way he walked. You carry that same kind of determination. That's how I knew." She introduced herself as Hazel Brooks, a lifelong neighbor of the lighthouse. She pointed her chin toward the cottage. "He kept it up better than anyone realized. Came back quietly, fixed things quietly, left quietly. Never told a soul except the ones who needed a place to rest." The wind picked up, pushing the scent of salt water across the cliff. "What do you mean?" I asked. Hazel's eyes softened. "Daniel rebuilt that place to erase what his family did there. But not everyone wants the truth changed. His sister Florence, she still thinks the lighthouse belongs to her, and she won't take kindly to you being here." The name struck me like a cold wave. Florence Mathers, his older sister, the woman Daniel barely mentioned. Hazel stepped closer. "You didn't just walk into a building, Ruth. You walked into a story Daniel spent years trying to protect. And now that he's gone, people will try to pull you into the parts he tried escaping." The lighthouse loomed behind me, steady and silent, as if holding its breath with me. I thanked Hazel and turned toward the cottage. My hand shook slightly as I gripped the brass key. It slid into the lock with unsettling ease, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil, sea breeze, and something warm, like a place lived in, but kept simple. The small living room had a sofa with a handmade quilt folded over the back. The bookshelf held titles I recognized from my own home. A ceramic bowl near the sink matched the pottery I used to collect. I stood there, absorbing everything. Daniel had been here recently. Recently enough that the tea bags in the drawer were the same brand I used at home. Recently enough that the rug looked freshly vacuumed. Recently enough that the space felt like an echo of our life together. It was confusing, comforting, and unsettling all at once. My heart tightened as I walked farther into the cottage. Every room held traces of him, small, deliberate, meaningful. And then I reached the last door on the right. Inside was a small office with a window overlooking the sea. On the desk sat a tape recorder, old and scratched from use. A label read, "For Ruth, Day 1." Next to it was a shoebox filled with neatly dated cassettes, dozens of them, one for every week over a span I couldn't yet guess. I reached for the first tape with shaking fingers. Daniel's voice filled the room, younger, steadier, carrying a weight he had never allowed me to hear. "Ruth, if you're listening, then I didn't get the chance to explain any of this, but you deserve to know what happened here, and what I've tried to build in its place." I sank into the chair slowly, my breath catching. He spoke about his childhood in a controlled, measured way, about the Bible training home his father and older sister ran inside this very lighthouse, about children being punished in the basement for the smallest misstep, about shame used as discipline, about fear used as faith, and then about how he quietly saved money and slipped away from Ohio once every few months, not for an affair, not for freedom, but to rebuild, to repair the rooms where children once cried, to create beds where frightened women could sleep safely, to give strangers the chance he never had. I pressed my hand over my mouth, overwhelmed by the quiet courage of a man I thought I already knew. When the tape ended, I sat there listening to the waves against the cliff, trying to make sense of all the years he kept this separate from our life, not out of betrayal, but out of fear that his past would taint our present. And then I heard footsteps outside. Slow, steady, familiar in their authority. Hazel's voice drifted faintly through the window. "I told her you'd be back eventually," she said to someone. A sharper voice answered, "You should have told me the moment she arrived. That lighthouse isn't hers. Daniel would never have wanted this." I recognized that voice, even though I'd never heard it in person. Florence Mathers, Daniel's sister, the woman he feared, and she was walking toward the cottage door. I closed the tape box gently and stood up, feeling the weight of the lighthouse settle on my shoulders. Whatever this place had been, whatever truth Daniel carried, I was standing in the center of it now, and the people who wanted to control that truth were already closing in. Florence's footsteps approached the lighthouse with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her an explanation. I felt it before I even saw her, a kind of pressure in the air, the way a storm shifts the light before the rain arrives. I stepped into the small hallway and waited as her shadow passed across the front window. When the knock came, it wasn't tentative. It was brisk, sharp, and full of expectation. I opened the door only halfway. Florence Mathers stood on the porch, wearing a long gray coat that matched the slate sky. Her hair was pinned tightly, not a strand out of place. She had the kind of expression older women sometimes carry, when they believe they have lived more correctly than everyone else. "Well," she said, her tone cool, "so you finally came." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know her. Yet from the way she looked me over, as if assessing whether I belonged here, I sensed she had already decided the answer. "Yes," I said quietly. "Daniel left instructions." She pursed her lips. "He left confusion. He left obligations undone. He left family responsibilities in disarray. And now you're here, trying to make sense of something that isn't yours to make sense of." I felt an old instinct rise in me, the one women in long marriages develop, the one that helps us speak calmly even when our hearts pound. "I'm here because he asked me to be," I said. Florence gave a dismissive wave of her hand, as if my words were nothing more than a fly passing her face. "He asked you, or you chose to meddle?" she asked. I had a key. That stopped her for a moment. Her eyes flicked to my hand, as though expecting to see the brass key still there. Before she could respond, Hazel appeared on her porch next door. She crossed her arms and leaned on the railing, watching us with quiet interest. It was clear this wasn't the first time she'd witnessed the tension between Daniel's past and present colliding. Florence noticed her too. "This isn't a public event, Hazel," she snapped. Hazel didn't flinch. "Just keeping an eye on things." Florence turned back to me. "I expect you'll be leaving soon. This place is in delicate condition. Daniel intended it for a church retreat. He told me that years ago. You can't possibly maintain it." Her certainty felt like a gust of cold air straight off the sea. "I won't make decisions today," I said. "I need time." "Time," she repeated, as if it were a childish request. "Time has run out. The lighthouse is part of our family's spiritual legacy. My father dedicated it to God. Daniel knew that. You don't understand the work we put into this place." I thought of the tape recorder inside. I thought of Daniel's voice describing punishments in the basement, the dark repentance room, the children who cried in the night. Whatever Florence called spiritual work, Daniel remembered as trauma. She studied me for a long moment. "You always were a pleasant woman, Ruth. Polite, quiet. But don't mistake this place for something you can handle." Then she turned and walked down the steps, her heels clicking against the wood. Hazel watched her go with a disapproving shake of her head. When Florence disappeared around the curve of the cliff road, Hazel came closer. "She's been waiting for him to die," Hazel said bluntly. "You weren't here when he was fixing this place up." But she showed up often enough to remind him she still considered herself the keeper of the family's work. "What kind of work?" I asked. Hazel sighed. "Not the kind anyone should be proud of." I invited her inside. She stepped over the threshold carefully, as if she were entering a sacred space. Her gaze moved around the room, landing on details only a longtime neighbor would recognize. "He really tried," she said quietly. "He tried to make this place something else." I motioned toward the office. "There are tapes." Hazel nodded. "Donna told me he was recording things. She's the social worker who helped him. He trusted her." The name was unfamiliar to me, but Hazel said it with respect. "Donna Price," she added. "She works down in town. Young, sharp, kind. She and your husband kept things discreet, helping women who needed a place to disappear for a few days. Sometimes a week, sometimes longer." I absorbed that slowly. "And the town knew?" "Some did," Hazel said. "Some pretended not to. Some were grateful. And some—" She glanced toward the direction Florence left. "Some wanted the lighthouse to stay the way it was when they were running it. To them, people like me and Donna and your husband were just interfering." I sat down at the table, my hands resting on the wood Daniel must have sanded. "Why didn't he tell me?" Hazel hesitated. "Maybe he thought you'd try to stop him." That hurt more than I expected. I always believed Daniel trusted me completely. But maybe there were parts of him he couldn't share until he had healed them enough to speak. Hazel put a hand gently on my arm. "He loved you. Anyone could see that. But shame is a powerful thing. He carried more than he ever let on." When she finally left, I went back to the office room and sat in front of the tape recorder. The ocean outside was restless, pushing waves against the rocks below. I pushed play on the second tape. Daniel's voice filled the small space again. Ruth, if you're listening to this one, then you've already heard the first. I'm sorry for keeping secrets. I'm sorry for breaking promises. I'm sorry for every time I came home tired and said I'd just been working late. I wasn't lying, but I also wasn't telling the whole truth. He paused, and the tape hissed softly. This lighthouse was the first place I learned fear, and I swore it would one day become a place where fear ended, not began. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of him guide me through the tangled past he had carried alone. He explained how he found the old building almost collapsing when he first returned. The paint peeled, windows cracked. The roof sagged under years of storms. But he saw in it the shape of something that could change. I couldn't save myself as a boy, he said, but I could save someone else. The words settled into my chest like a truth I'd always suspected but never named. He talked about meeting Donna, the young social worker who handled cases the town preferred to ignore. She worked with women who needed temporary shelter, women whose families might come looking for them, women whose stories weren't believed or welcomed in polite company. Donna had heard rumors about the old lighthouse and wondered if the space could be used for emergencies. Daniel offered, on one condition: no one from his family could know. The next tape I played described the renovations. He fixed the plumbing himself, scrubbed the old basement, painted the walls with soft colors he thought children would find comforting, set up bunk beds for mothers and kids, stocked shelves with simple clothes donated anonymously. When he said he'd built a small bookshelf and filled it with children's stories, the same ones I used to read as a school secretary, my throat tightened. He had chosen things I loved, not because the women needed them, but because he imagined me there too, imagined what comfort should feel like. When the second tape ended, I sat at the desk, staring at the shoebox full of weeks I had never lived with him. Weeks he had spent here, painting, repairing, listening, helping. The doorbell rang again, but not with Florence's sharp impatience. This knock was lighter, tentative. A young woman stood on the porch, her coat too thin for the cold wind. She had dark hair pulled into a messy bun and tired eyes that still held warmth. "Mrs. Carver?" she asked softly. "I'm Donna Price." She held a folder against her chest, as if unsure whether she was welcome. "Hazel told me you arrived," she continued. "I didn't want you to feel lost." I invited her in. She stepped carefully, scanning the room the way a person scans a place where painful conversations often occurred. "Daniel talked about you," I said. She exhaled slowly, as if relieved. "He was a good man." "Why didn't he tell me about all this?" Donna hesitated. "Because he was afraid you'd try to protect him from the weight of it, and he wanted to carry it alone. He thought he owed that to the world somehow." She sat at the table and opened the folder. Inside were notes, first names, dates, nothing traceable, nothing that would expose anyone, just small reminders of the lives that passed through these walls. "There were 12 women last year," she said. 6 the year before. Most stayed just a few nights. Some stayed long enough to start over. He kept this place going even when the town murmured about him, even when Florence tried to shut it down. That caught my attention. Shut it down? Donna nodded. She told him he was misusing family property. She complained to the pastor. She told local committees he was offering shelter to unapproved individuals. To her, everything was about image and authority. I absorbed that slowly. Why didn't she stop him? "Because Hazel backed him," Donna said. "And because deep down, Florence knew Daniel was stronger than he used to be. He wasn't the scared boy she raised. He had something to protect now." Donna looked around the room, her expression softening. "I think he always hoped you'd see it one day. Maybe not while he was alive, but eventually. After she left, I wandered through the cottage room by room again, seeing it differently than when I'd first arrived. The space wasn't just lived in, it was shaped with intention, transformed by determination. In one of the back rooms, I found a corkboard pinned with scraps of paper. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but when I leaned closer, I saw first names written in different handwriting styles. Nina, safe now, heading to Portland. Claire, baby due in March. Mia, bus ticket bought, new ID ready. Sonia, learning to drive again. Jess, I'll send a postcard when I can. My fingertips brushed each note gently, as though touching the lives Daniel helped. One note at the bottom read, "Ruth would have wanted you safe." My breath caught at that. He had thought of me while doing this work. He had imagined how I would react, how I might care. He had known who I was, even when he didn't tell me what he was doing. As night began to fall, I stepped outside onto the small porch. The lighthouse beacon swept across the dark water, steady and sure. The air grew colder, but something inside me warmed, a sense of connection to Daniel I hadn't expected. Then I saw movement down the cliff path. A man in his 30s, tall and hurried, walked toward the lighthouse. When he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he paused and looked up at me. "Mrs. Carver?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Marcus," he said. "Your son." I blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" He looked uncomfortable, frustrated, angry in a familiar way I had seen too many times. "Aunt Florence called me," he said. "She said you came up here alone. She said you were dealing with something you shouldn't be dealing with. She said Dad was confused, that he didn't mean for you to come here." I steadied myself against the porch railing. "Your father left me a key," I said. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, you don't know everything. Dad was secretive. He hid things. He kept money aside without telling us. He left me out of decisions. Aunt Florence thinks he—" I held up a hand. "Marcus, stop." He stared at me, startled by my tone. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm not handing this place to Florence, and I'm not going back to Ohio until I hear every truth your father recorded." He exhaled harshly. "Mom, this isn't like you." For the first time in years, I heard myself answer without hesitation. Maybe it's time I changed. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but footsteps crunched behind him. Hazel appeared again, hands tucked into her coat pockets. "She's right," Hazel said to my son. "Your father wanted her here, and whatever your aunt told you, it's only her." Sighed. "You don't know the rest." Marcus looked between us. "I don't understand any of this." "You will," I said, "but not tonight." He stayed just long enough to make sure I locked the door, then walked back toward town, his shoulders tight with worry. When I turned off the lights, the house fell quiet, except for the steady heartbeat of the sea. I stood in the dark, listening to the waves, feeling the weight of Daniel's past settling into the walls around me. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of everything changing. The day I stepped from confusion into truth, from silence into the work Daniel left unfinished. In the distance, the lighthouse beacon swept across the night, as if guiding me toward the next secret waiting in the dark. I didn't sleep well that first night in the lighthouse cottage. The ocean had its own rhythm, steady but restless, and every time I drifted toward sleep, some sound in the old house pulled me back. A creaking floorboard, a gust of wind pressing the shutters, the faint echo of memories that weren't mine but clung to the walls anyway. I finally rose just after dawn, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and walked through the cottage in the soft gray morning light. I paused at the corkboard again, touching the names gently. Somewhere out there, these women were alive and building new lives, carrying parts of Daniel's kindness with them. It made me proud. It made me wonder how I had never sensed all of this. I brewed a cup of tea in the small kitchen. The kettle whistled softly, the same brand we used at home. That detail alone was enough to bring tears to my eyes. He had thought of me so much more than I ever suspected. After breakfast, I returned to the desk and pushed play on the next tape. Daniel's voice filled the small room, softer this time, almost reflective. "Ruth, there's something I never told you about my sister." I took a breath and leaned back in the chair. She wasn't always the strict, controlling woman people know now. When we were young, she was the favorite. She believed our father's every word, believed suffering made you worthy, believed fear kept you righteous. I never blamed her in the beginning. She was raised to believe cruelty was discipline. The tape hissed quietly for a moment. But she grew into a woman who needed control, like other people need air. She believed the lighthouse was her ministry. She believed the children we brought here needed to be taught obedience. My father let her run things. I was just the spare set of hands. My chest tightened. This wasn't just history. It was explanation, apology, and confession layered together in one man's quiet voice. He continued. "When I was 12, I tried to run away. I hid behind the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. But Florence found me. She dragged me back inside and locked me in that basement room, the repentance room. I stayed there for 2 nights. No food, no water, except what she pushed under the door. She said I needed to understand respect." I closed my eyes, picturing him as a boy, hungry, cold, trapped in a place that was supposed to protect him. When I was older and I finally left this town, I promised myself 2 things. 1, that I would never let anyone lock me into fear again. And 2, that someday, somehow, I'd turn this place into something good. He let out a slow breath on the tape. "That's why I'm asking you to finish what I couldn't finish alone." The tape clicked off. I sat there for a long moment, letting the ocean wind whistle through the cracked window. Daniel had carried so much. Too much. It was no wonder he hesitated to talk about his childhood. Some stories grow heavier with time, not lighter. A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone that early. I opened it to find Donna standing there again, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I wasn't sure what you liked," she said. "So I brought options." I stepped aside to let her in. She looked around the cottage, as if checking whether the old place had settled overnight. "I wanted to see how you were doing after yesterday," she said. "Florence can be intense." "That's one word for it," I replied. Donna smiled gently. "She's made it her life's mission to control this place. She believes she's protecting some sort of family legacy. But that's only because the truth of what happened here doesn't fit the story she wants to tell." She walked into the office and glanced at the tapes. "You've listened?" "Only a couple," I said. "It's a lot to process." Donna nodded. "He recorded them over months. Sometimes he'd send me a message saying he'd finally talked about a memory he'd avoided for years. He was trying to make sense of everything before choosing who should carry it next." "I didn't know he thought about any of this," I said. "He kept it buried." "Survival," she said. "People bury what hurts too much." While we talked, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, frowned, then silenced it. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Just chatter," she said. "Word travels quickly in small towns. And the fact that you're here, well, some people are interested. Some are curious. Some are already taking sides." I understood immediately. This wasn't just Daniel's past I was stepping into. It was a full ecosystem of opinions, gossip, loyalties, grudges, and half-told stories. Donna reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. "These are some of the women who stayed here," she said. "First names only. The notes are brief, but I wanted you to understand the kind of work Daniel did." I flipped through the pages slowly. A woman fleeing a violent husband with 2 children. A teenager escaping a house where she wasn't safe. A mother trying to leave a situation before her baby was born. A grandmother seeking refuge from her own grown children. Every page held a small story, bits of courage, bits of terror, all bound by one shared truth. Daniel had given them a place to breathe. "Florence can't know about these women," Donna said. "If she could identify them, she'd make trouble. Not because she hates them personally, but because she believes they're outsiders contaminating the family's sacred place." The phrasing made my stomach turn. "She told Marcus that the Lighthouse was meant for retreats," I said. "For church programs." Donna scoffed softly. "Retreats where they teach fear? I've heard the stories, Ruth. I've talked to women who grew up under her father's rules. Those weren't retreats. They were obedience camps." She looked toward the window, where the lighthouse towered behind the cottage. "And Daniel broke the cycle." A lump formed in my throat. "He thought he was hiding it to protect me." "Maybe he was protecting himself too," Donna said. "Sometimes the people we love show us only the parts of themselves they believe make them worthy. Pain doesn't always fit into that." There was a quiet knock on the open door frame. Hazel stepped inside, her face troubled. "She's been talking to people," Hazel said. "Your sister-in-law." Donna stiffened. "What now?" "She's telling folks that Ruth is here to claim the property and close it down, that she plans to sell the lighthouse to a developer." I blinked. "What? I've only been here 24 hours." Hazel sighed. "Truth doesn't always matter in this town. Control does." Donna turned to me. "This is her way of steering public opinion. She wants the town behind her before you can even figure out what's going on." I felt a wave of frustration rise in me. Why? What does she think she's gaining by this? "Image," Hazel answered. "Authority, and the belief that she's the rightful guardian of her father's work." Donna nodded. "She may not have spoken to the women who stayed here, but Florence knows exactly what Daniel was doing. She just didn't like that it undermined her version of righteousness." "Do people believe her?" I asked. Hazel hesitated. "Some will. They always have. She's a matriarch in the church. She leads prayer groups. People think she has God's ear." Donna added, "And Daniel never told the town the truth about what this lighthouse became. He didn't want the women exposed or talked about. So he let Florence's version of the family history continue." "So now I walk into a story already being told," I murmured. "Yes," Hazel said softly. "But you can tell your own too." After they left, I sat at the table for a long time, trying to understand what I had stepped into. It wasn't just Daniel's past. It wasn't just Florence's control. It was something more, layered. Years of silence, decades of community power structures, unspoken generational expectations. I reached for another tape. Daniel's voice cracked slightly as it started. "If Florence ever confronts you, Ruth, please remember she is not the child she once was. She is the woman our father shaped, and she believes the past belongs to her alone." My throat tightened as he continued. "She will twist this place into whatever story suits her. But the truth is simple. This lighthouse hurt me, and I turned it into a place that helped others." A knock at the door interrupted the recording again. This time, it wasn't Florence. It wasn't Hazel. It wasn't Donna. It was Marcus. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, pacing the small living room the way he used to pace his childhood bedroom when something didn't go his way. "Mom, we need to talk." I turned off the tape. "Marcus, please." "No, listen." He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "I talked to Aunt Florence again. She said Dad was involved in something unhealthy here, something dangerous. She said people were coming and going at all hours. She said there were rumors about him giving money away. She thinks this place drained him. And now you're here, stepping into something he tried to escape." I held his gaze carefully. "Your father wasn't escaping. He was helping." "Helping who?" Marcus snapped. "Strangers? People we don't know? Why didn't he help us?" It wasn't a question about the lighthouse. It was a question about a son who never understood his father. I swallowed gently. "Marcus, not everything your father did was about money. Or us. Some things were about healing." He frowned. "Healing from what?" "You didn't grow up here. You didn't see what happened inside these walls." "So tell me," he said sharply. "Tell me what he hid." "Let me understand it first," I said. "Please." He shook his head. "You're getting in too deep. You don't know these people. You don't know what they expect. And you don't know what Aunt Florence is capable of." "Your aunt is not the authority here," I said carefully. "She's the only one who seems to know anything," he shot back. "And she's telling only the part that protects her." Marcus paused. For a moment, uncertainty softened his expression. Then he sighed, exhausted. "Mom, please come home." I stepped closer and put my hand on his arm. "I can't. Not yet." His shoulders slumped. "Then I'm staying in town, at least until I know you're safe." I didn't argue. Part of me was grateful he cared enough to worry. After he left, I returned to the tapes, but my mind wandered too much to absorb Daniel's voice. The room felt heavy with competing truths. My own grief sat beside confusion, fear, curiosity, and a growing sense of purpose. I walked into the kitchen to steady myself and glanced out the back window. A small wooden shed stood near the cliff edge. I hadn't noticed it before. Something about it nagged at me. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The wind was sharper than earlier. The shed door trembled slightly, as if caught in a gust. Inside, I found old tools, buckets of paint, a box of blankets, and a shelf of children's shoes. Tiny sneakers, pink sandals, worn-out boots. Someone had placed them carefully, as if saving them for the next person who arrived with nothing. A part of me broke, then rebuilt in the span of seconds. I closed the shed gently and looked back at the cottage. Daniel hadn't simply renovated this place. He had redeemed it. And the more I learned, the more certain I became that Florence wasn't interested in redemption. She wanted control. Control of the building. Control of the story. Control of the narrative she'd kept polished for decades. As I walked back toward the cottage, I saw Hazel standing near her porch again. "Everything all right?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm starting to understand." She nodded. "Understanding is the first step. Standing your ground is the second." I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. As the sun dipped low, I sat back at the desk and picked up the next tape. But I didn't play it. Not yet. I wanted to listen, but I also needed to prepare myself for the weight each memory carried. Instead, I opened the window. The ocean wind flowed in, carrying salt, cold air, and the distant cry of seabirds. The lighthouse beacon swept across the cliff, steady and deliberate. A light meant to guide people home. I wasn't home yet, not fully, not emotionally, not spiritually, but I was closer than I'd been yesterday. And I could feel something shifting, a steady strengthening inside me, a sense that Daniel had left more than instructions. He had left a calling. I wasn't ready for Florence's next move. I wasn't ready for how the town would respond. I wasn't ready for what the tapes would reveal next. But I knew one thing clearly. I was not leaving the lighthouse. Not until I heard every truth Daniel left for me. Not until I understood the full story he never had the courage or time to tell in person. And not until I decided, on my own terms, what should live on here. The next morning, the lighthouse cottage felt different. The peaceful quiet of my first night had changed into something more uneasy, as if the air itself sensed the tension building in the town below. I moved slowly through the rooms, opening curtains, letting in light, and trying to center myself before playing another of Daniel's tapes. But even simple tasks felt heavier. Each new truth shifted the balance of what I thought I knew, not just about Daniel, but about the people connected to this place. Before starting the next tape, I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat by the window overlooking the sea. The waves were rougher than the day before. They crashed against the rocks with a force that reminded me of arguments left unresolved. Grief had softened some memories, but here, in this old lighthouse, the past had a sharpness I hadn't expected. I eventually turned on the tape. Daniel's voice was softer, more deliberate. Ruth, if you've made it this far, then I need to explain what came next. The first time Donna brought a woman here, I didn't feel ready. I was terrified Florence would find out. Terrified the old memories would come flooding back. But you once told me that fear is just a warning, not a command. I repeated that to myself every time I walked through these rooms. I could picture him saying it to himself as he painted walls and fixed hinges, trying to overwrite the echoes of childhood voices. She arrived late at night. His voice went on. A woman with a bruised cheek and a little boy who couldn't stop shaking. I set up a cot for the child and made a bed for her in the small room near the back. She cried when she saw the blankets folded neatly, as if she'd forgotten what it felt like to be shown simple kindness. He paused, letting the memory settle. That night, I sat awake for hours. Her boy had a nightmare, and when he cried out, I froze. It took everything in me to move toward him. But when he saw me, he backed away in fear. I realized then that this place still carried the energy of what my father and Florence had done here. It wasn't enough to repaint rooms. I had to change the purpose of the house itself. And I vowed that when people walked through that door, they would feel safe, not judged. My heart warmed at the tenderness he carried for strangers. And yet, hearing his voice made me ache with the knowledge that he had fought so many battles alone. The tape clicked off. I sat quietly, letting the waves fill the silence. The lighthouse beacon made its slow rotation, its light sweeping across the water like a steady heartbeat. Then I heard a sound from outside, quick footsteps on gravel. When I opened the front door, Hazel stood there with her coat zipped to her chin, looking more serious than I had ever seen her. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside. She entered the kitchen and sat at the small wooden table, removing her gloves slowly. "Word is spreading in town," she said, "and not the kind you'd want." I sat across from her. "What are they saying?" Hazel folded her hands. "That you plan to sell the lighthouse. That you want to turn it into a rental or retreat space. That Daniel left it in bad shape and you're overwhelmed." I frowned, but I haven't said anything to anyone. "You don't have to," she said gently. "Florence is talking enough for everyone." The knot in my stomach tightened. "She's been visiting the church ladies," Hazel continued. "She's called a few town council members. She's telling them that you came unannounced, that you don't understand the local dynamics, and that Daniel was too fragile in his later years to make sound decisions." I sank back in my chair. "So she's rewriting the story," Hazel nodded. And when people hear her version enough times, it becomes their truth. I ran my hands over the table, trying to calm my rising frustration. What am I supposed to do? Hold steady, Hazel said. People in small towns talk fast, but they learn slow. You need to let the truth catch up. Before I could respond, there was another knock at the door. Firm, loud, insistent. Hazel looked toward the entrance. That's not a good knock. I opened the door cautiously. A woman I didn't recognize stood on the porch. Her hands were shoved deep into the pockets of her jacket, and she had an expression that flickered between nervous and determined. "You're Ruth?" she asked. "Yes." She stepped closer. "My name is Lena Torres." Hazel inhaled sharply. "Oh." Lena glanced at Hazel briefly before turning back to me. "I saw Florence at the grocery store," she said. "She was spreading things about you, saying you want this place shut down, saying Daniel never wanted outsiders here. I had to come, because you should know the truth." I stepped aside to let her in. Lena walked into the living room, stopping near the bookshelf. Her eyes softened when she saw a specific spine. "Daniel gave me that book," she said quietly. "For my son." Hazel closed the door and joined us. Lena took a slow breath. "I stayed here 2 years ago. I came with my son, just for 3 nights. Daniel saved us. I don't know where we'd be without him. And I don't care what Florence thinks. This place helped me in a way I'll never be able to repay." Her voice broke at the last word. She cleared her throat. "I wanted you to hear that from me," she said, "because Florence is doing everything she can to control the story." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded and wiped her eyes. "Be careful. Because when someone like Florence feels threatened, they don't choose kindness." After she left, Hazel sat back down at the table. "There," she said softly. "You're not alone." But her reassurance did little to ease the growing unease inside me. That afternoon, I walked into town to buy groceries and get a sense of the whispers Hazel mentioned. Gull Harbor was small, but its streets were filled with the subtle choreography of people who had lived together for decades. At the general store, conversations paused when I stepped inside. A few polite smiles appeared, but they carried a stiffness under the surface. As I approached the counter, the woman behind it, mid-50s, short hair, glasses perched low on her nose, looked at me with guarded curiosity. "You're Daniel's wife," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I'm staying at the Lighthouse for a while." She nodded slowly. "Word is you came to evaluate things." "I came to understand things," I corrected gently. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Be careful who you trust around here. Some people don't let go of old stories, and some don't want new ones told." Her tone held more warning than gossip. I thanked her and left. By late afternoon, the sky darkened earlier than usual. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of an oncoming storm. I walked back to the cottage quickly, mindful of how fast coastal weather could turn. When I reached the lighthouse, I noticed something off. The shed door was ajar again, swinging in the wind, but I had closed it firmly that morning. My stomach tightened. I approached cautiously. The door creaked open without resistance. Inside, the air felt colder than the outdoors, as if someone had opened it recently. The blankets that had been stacked neatly on the shelf were now slightly askew, and on the floor, near the entrance, lay a small piece of chipped paint. Blue paint, the same shade Daniel had used on the shed doorframe. I stepped back and closed the door quickly, checking the lock. Someone had been there. I hurried inside the cottage and locked the front door. The storm hit within minutes. Rain slashing sideways, winds pounding the walls, the ocean roaring louder than anything I'd heard since arriving. As night fell, the lighthouse beacon blinked steadily, its faint hum vibrating through the walls. I tried to distract myself by baking biscuits from a boxed mix in the kitchen, but every sound outside pulled my attention back to the storm. Then, just past 11, something slammed against the front of the cottage. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It had too much force, too much intention. I grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door slowly, each step careful and quiet. My heart pounded hard enough that I could hear it over the storm. I opened the door a crack. The front wooden sign, Harbor House, hung crookedly by one nail. Someone had taken a black marker and crossed out the painted letters. In their place, they had scrawled 2 words across the wood: Sin House. The rain ran in dark streaks down the vandalized surface, making the letters look like they were bleeding. My breath caught. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a warning. I pulled the sign down, brought it inside, and set it on the table. Water dripped onto the floor. My hands shook as I stared at the message. I tried to think logically. Florence wouldn't stoop to vandalism, but someone connected to her? Someone who shared her beliefs? Someone who saw my presence as a threat? I didn't know. I locked every door and window. I checked the back door twice. Then I sat at the table, staring at the sign, until the storm quieted enough that I could hear the ocean again. Just after midnight, I felt steady enough to reach for the next tape. Daniel's voice was worn and tired in this one. "Ruth, if things have reached this point, I need you to understand something important. I was always afraid that if I died before telling you, Florence would twist my story back into the one she prefers. She believes this lighthouse belongs to her God, to her rules, to her childhood version of righteousness. But the truth is simpler, and I need you to know it." A long pause. This place was built on fear, and I tried, piece by piece, to rebuild it into mercy. I didn't finish. I couldn't. I needed someone to carry it on. And the only person I trust is you, Ruth, because you always knew when a child needed comfort before they spoke a word. The tape ended. I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the waves soften after the storm. Something inside me shifted that night. Not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet settling of resolve. I wasn't leaving. Not because I wanted to stay in a town full of whispers. Not because the lighthouse was beautiful, but because Daniel had asked me to finish something that mattered deeply. And I could feel my own purpose rising in the spaces he left behind. When I finally went to bed, the storm had passed, but the message on the sign remained etched in my mind. Someone out there believed I didn't belong here. Someone wanted to scare me. Someone didn't want Daniel's truth to survive. But I had never been easily frightened. Life teaches you that fear can shake you, but it can't stop you unless you let it. And I wasn't letting it. Not here. Not now. Not with so much still left to uncover. The morning after the storm felt deceptively calm. The sky was washed clean, pale blue with streaks of early sun stretching across the horizon. The lighthouse beacon had switched off hours ago, leaving the tower looking almost gentle in the daylight. But the quiet around me felt like the pause after a deep breath, the kind people take before stepping into something difficult. I stood on the porch holding the vandalized Harbor House sign. The black letters still stared back at me, harsh and unsettling. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, but fatigue was something I could manage. What weighed heavier was the realization that someone in this small town was willing to cross a line. Hazel spotted me from her porch and walked over, her coat tied tightly around her. She studied the sign with a deep frown. "This isn't kids' mischief," she said. "This is someone sending a message." "I know," I replied quietly, And I'm guessing you're not planning to run. No, I said. Daniel didn't run anymore, and neither will I. Hazel nodded with the kind of respect older women give each other when they recognize a shared backbone. Then you need to get ahead of this. How? By telling the truth before Florence tells her version loud enough for everyone to repeat it. I sighed. Do you really think anyone would listen to me? Hazel gave a small, steady smile. This town doesn't trust easily, but it recognizes sincerity when it sees it, and you have something they don't. Daniel's story. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. Donna. Town meeting tonight, 7, Church Hall. Florence requested it. You should come. My stomach tightened. The church hall wasn't neutral ground. That was Florence's territory, her audience, her pulpit. Hazel must have seen the uncertainty in my face. You can either let her frame you, she said, or you can show up and let the truth speak for itself. I held the sign a little tighter. I'm scared. Being scared means you understand what's at stake, Hazel said softly. It doesn't mean you walk away. The rest of the day moved slowly. I spent hours listening to more of Daniel's tapes. His voice revealed pieces of the past he had never shared. Memories of children locked in the basement. Nights when Florence enforced punishments she believed were righteous. Years of silence that hardened into guilt he carried into adulthood. On one tape, he sounded weary. I know I should have told you sooner, Ruth, he said. But I spent so many years convincing myself it was behind me, until I realized the only way to heal was to turn the place that broke me into a refuge. I didn't want you to hate this lighthouse the way I once did. I wanted you to see what it had become, not what it used to be. I paused the tape, letting his words rest inside me. He had believed I could carry this truth with grace. That faith alone steadied me more than I expected. Later that afternoon, Donna stopped by with a folder of notes. I don't want to pressure you, she said gently, but tonight will matter. Florence asked the pastor to hold a community discussion about the future of the lighthouse. People will be there, some sympathetic, some not. I traced my fingers along the folder's edge. Why is she so determined to control this? Donna sat across from me at the table. Power, Ruth. Image. The lighthouse is a symbol for her, of her family's authority. Losing control of it means losing a narrative she's kept intact for years. And she thinks I'm her obstacle. She thinks you're an inconvenience. But she also underestimates you. People like her always do. I looked out the window at the towering lighthouse. What should I say? Tell the truth, Donna replied. Tell your truth. And tell Daniel's. You don't have to expose every detail, just enough so people understand why this place matters. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering my thoughts, not rehearsing exactly, just organizing them. I wasn't accustomed to public speaking, and certainly not on a topic so raw. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence was no longer my shield. It had become the very thing Florence used against me. Marcus called around 5. Mom, Aunt Florence said you're causing trouble, he said quickly. She said you're refusing to cooperate. What's going on? Marcus, I interrupted gently. Stop listening to only one voice. He paused, thrown off by my firmness. I can't explain everything yet, I continued, but your father did something good here, something important, and I won't let Florence twist it for her own agenda. He exhaled. I just want you safe. I know, but safety doesn't always mean staying quiet. I could almost hear him wrestling with that idea. Do you want me to come to the meeting? Yes, I said quietly. I want you there. By 6:30, cars were already parked outside the church hall. The building was old, with white clapboard siding and a wooden steeple. Light spilled from the windows, casting warm squares onto the gravel parking lot. Inside, people murmured in small clusters. Some looked curious, some cautious, some sympathetic. Others, especially the older church members, stood close to Florence like she was their shield. Donna waved me over. She stood near Hazel, who had dressed in her Sunday best, a soft blue sweater and pearls that looked like they'd lived through decades of community gatherings. "Ready?" Donna asked. "No," I admitted. "But I'm here." "That's enough," Hazel said. A few minutes later, the pastor stepped forward and called the room to order. He cleared his throat and gave a polite but strained smile. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said. Sister Florence requested this time to discuss the future of the Lighthouse property and to invite dialogue regarding its use. He gestured toward her. Florence walked to the center with the posture of someone accustomed to leading a room. She thanked the pastor, smoothed her skirt, and turned to face the audience. "As many of you know," she began, "the Lighthouse has been in my family for generations. It was used for spiritual development and community programs under my father's guidance. It has always been a place of reflection, faith, and moral instruction." Her tone was steady, confident. "When my brother Daniel left town years ago, we believed the Lighthouse would eventually return to its intended purpose. But recently, his widow has come from Ohio to evaluate the property. And from what I understand, she is considering changes that may not honor our family's legacy." A faint murmur rippled through the room. I kept my gaze on her calmly. Florence continued, "This building was never meant to be some kind of refuge for strangers. It was meant to uplift our own community, to guide our own youth. And I believe we must ensure Daniel's true intentions remain respected." She stepped aside with a tight smile, certain she had established herself as the authority. The pastor turned toward me. "Mrs. Carver, would you like to speak?" The room fell silent. I stood slowly, steadying myself on the chair for a moment. My pulse thumped in my ears, but I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. When I reached the center of the room, I scanned the audience. The same people who'd watched Daniel grow up, who'd heard Florence's stories, who now waited to hear what the outsider widow had to say. I took a breath. "I didn't come here to change history," I began. "I came here because my husband asked me to, and because he left me a key to this place, literally and figuratively." There was a soft shift among the chairs, a few curious nods. "I didn't grow up here," I continued, "but I loved a man who did, and that man carried a childhood he never spoke about. Not fully. Not until he began recording tapes that he left for me. Tapes that describe not a sanctuary, but a harsh environment where children learned fear, not faith." A few people straightened in their seats. Florence stiffened. "I'm not here to shame anyone," I said gently, "but I am here to tell the truth. Daniel worked for years rebuilding that lighthouse, not for retreats or spiritual instruction, but to provide a safe place for people who needed shelter." Donna stepped forward then, her voice clear and steady. "I can confirm that," she said. "I worked with Daniel for years. He helped women and children in dangerous situations. He helped them quietly and without praise. And he turned that lighthouse into a home when they had none." A murmur spread through the crowd again, this time with more warmth, less suspicion. Then a voice from the back spoke up. It was Lena. "He helped me," she said, stepping forward. "He helped my son, and I owe my life to that lighthouse." She walked closer, her voice trembling but strong. "When I came here 2 years ago, I had nowhere to go. No friends, no family. No one believed me. But Daniel did. And that place gave me the first safe night I'd had in months." She paused, letting her truth settle over the room. I won't let his kindness be erased by old stories. Hazel rose from her seat next. I grew up next to that lighthouse, she said firmly. And I heard things as a girl that no child should hear. I know what it used to be, and I know what Daniel turned it into. I support Ruth. I support the truth. Then, to my surprise, Marcus stood up. He looked uncertain, but determined. I didn't know any of this, he said. But I know my father didn't run from responsibility. And I know he wasn't broken. He was trying to do something good. I stand with my mother. A hush fell over the room. Florence's face tightened. She rose abruptly. These are sentimental stories, she said sharply. Emotional distortions. My father was a good man. The lighthouse was a place of discipline, not danger. And Daniel was misguided. I turned to her. With respect, Florence. Pain doesn't disappear just because it makes someone uncomfortable. And healing doesn't erase the truth of what came before. Daniel rebuilt that place with love, and I intend to honor that. The room was silent again, but something had shifted. The weight of Florence's influence felt lighter than before. People exchanged glances. Some nodded toward me, others frowned thoughtfully. A few avoided Florence's gaze entirely. The pastor cleared his throat. It seems there are strong opinions on both sides, but I believe we owe it to Daniel's memory to listen to all perspectives. Florence opened her mouth to object, but he raised a hand. Let's take time to reflect, he said. This discussion will continue at a later date. For now, thank you all for your honesty. The meeting dispersed slowly. Some people came to shake my hand. Others gave small, respectful nods. Lena hugged me tightly. Hazel squeezed my arm. Donna said she was proud of me. Marcus looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. Florence, however, left without a word. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor, each step echoing with frustration. When I stepped outside, the air felt crisp. The stars were bright above the dark ocean. And for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like a stranger in this town. I felt like a woman stepping into the truth, not only Daniel's truth, but my own strength. And I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the town hall meeting arrived with a calmness that felt almost foreign. The sky was clear, washed pale by sunlight, and the wind had gentled into something almost warm. I sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time since I'd arrived in Gull Harbor, it didn't feel like the lighthouse was holding its breath. It felt like it was exhaling. Marcus came out of the cottage, rubbing his hands together against the chill. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Better than yesterday. He sat beside me. For a long moment, we just watched the waves together. It reminded me of when he was young, before the responsibilities of adulthood hardened his expression, before he learned to hide his softer parts. Last night had shaken him, but it also seemed to open something. I wish Dad had told me, he said quietly. I think he wanted to, I replied. He just didn't know how. Marcus nodded slowly. I didn't understand him, not really, but hearing everyone talk about him, it helped. I touched his arm gently. There's still more to understand, but we'll do it together. Later that morning, Donna arrived with a paper bag of pastries and a tired smile. Town's talking, she said, but in a different way now. Less suspicion, more curiosity. Some people are even asking me questions about the women Daniel helped. I smiled faintly. That must feel good. It does, she admitted. And it scares Florence to death. Hazel joined us shortly after, carrying a folder she said I should see. Inside were handwritten notes, dates, receipts, and small lists Daniel had left with her over the years. Back up, she explained. in case anything ever happened to him. Each page held evidence, not legal documents, just pieces of the quiet work he'd done. Supplies he'd bought for women starting over, bus tickets, grocery lists for mothers who arrived with nothing, small expenses he covered without asking for anything in return. "These aren't for proving anything publicly," Hazel said. "They're just for you, to know the kind of man you married." I traced his writing with my fingertip. Even in these simple notes, I could feel his heart. We spent the afternoon repairing the vandalized front sign. Marcus sanded away the black marker while Donna and I repainted the letters. Harbor House. Not because a sign defines a place, but because it reminds people what it stands for. When we hung it back up, the cottage felt whole again. Toward evening, after Donna and Hazel went home, Marcus and I listened to one final tape. Daniel's voice was steady, almost peaceful. "Ruth, I built this place with the hope that someday it could live without me. Maybe not as a grand mission. Maybe not with fanfare. Just quietly, gently. The way you always taught children in your school office, firm enough to guide them, soft enough to let them feel safe. If you choose to keep this place alive, do it your way. Not mine, not Florence's, yours." He paused. "And if you choose to let it go, I will understand that too. My only wish is that the lighthouse stops being a place of fear. That's all I ever wanted." When the tape clicked off, the silence felt warm, not heavy. Marcus looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. Not quickly, but with the carefulness women our age learn from years of tending to others' needs. I walked to the window and looked out at the lighthouse tower, its white paint bright against the darkening sky. The beam was off for now, resting until nightfall. "I want this place to remain what he made it," I said. "A refuge, a pause, a beginning." Marcus nodded. "Then I'll help however I can." The rest of the evening unfolded quietly. We made a small dinner. We talked about Daniel, not the man he tried to appear, but the man he truly was. A boy hurt by a place who had grown into someone determined to fix it. Later, after Marcus went to bed, I stepped outside with a coat wrapped around my shoulders. The air was cool but gentle. The lighthouse beacon blinked on, sending its soft arc across the water. The rhythm of it was steady and reassuring. Hazel's porch light glowed next door. Somewhere in town, people were replaying last night's meeting in their heads, reshaping opinions. And somewhere far from here, women who once stayed inside. These walls were living new lives, working, raising children, finding peace. Standing there, I realized that legacy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It passes from one steady hand to another. It lives in quiet rooms and folded blankets and handwritten notes stored in shoeboxes. It survives through the choices we make long after someone is gone. When I finally went back inside, I paused at the doorframe and ran my hand along the wood Daniel had sanded smooth. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel uncertainty. I felt purpose, gentle, clear, undeniably mine. This lighthouse no longer belonged to the past. And neither did I. Some stories aren't rewritten loudly. They're rewritten in the steady, everyday acts of caring for the living and honoring the truth of the dead. That night, before I turned off the lights, I whispered into the quiet room. "You can rest now, Daniel. I'll take it from here." Because truth doesn't disappear when it's buried. It waits. And sometimes all it needs is one woman willing to dig.